Kwaba, welcome to this week's edition of Ghana in Focus with myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, journalist, podcaster, and entrepreneur. And in this week's edition of Ghana in Focus, we're focusing on the economy. So last week we told, or a couple of weeks ago rather, we told you about the recent trip to Japan by President Mahama wanting to court Japanese businesses, and also about the Pakistan rice fair that was held in Accra recently. And we told you why that was not beneficial to Ghana. This week, we're talking about the cedi because you may have heard, but recently, the cedi has lost a bit of its value in the last month or so. So we tell you about that, why the cedi lost value, what can be done to stop the fall, correction, and other issues behind the cedi. So before we get into the podcast, if you like what you hear, please share to your friends, family, social media networks. Please subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on YouTube. We want to get many subscribers as we can on YouTube. So please subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on YouTube. Hit the notification bell, meaning that every time we upload a new podcast, YouTube will notify you. Similarly, we're also on Spotify. So please subscribe to Ghana African Focus on Spotify. Look out for that on Spotify. Click the follow bell, meaning that every time we upload on Spotify, they will notify you of that. All right. And if you want to donate to the show, we accept donations in kind to help us improve the show and continue to bring some fantastic content from Ghana and from the African world as a whole. So if you want to donate as little as $3 a month, I will leave you the donate button on the footnotes to the show. Again, if you still are interested in wanting to do business in Ghana, looking about things like how to get citizenship, how to start business in Ghana, where to get land, etc. And we do offer a consulting session whereby we can, book you in for a session to let you know, what sort of things you want and how we can help you achieve those goals. So if you want to book your appointment with myself, I've got more than 10 years experience of doing business in Ghana, i.e. I've got land, I've got property, I've got financial instruments in Ghana. Then I'll leave you my email address again in the footnotes to the show, and you can just drop me an email wanting to book your consultation session. All right, so let's get into this week's edition of Ghana in Focus, looking about the cedi, why it's dropped recently, is it good for Ghana, and what can be done to reverse this fall. So, if you're not aware, the Ghanaian cedi has lost 13, i.e. 13% of its value in the last month or so. If you recall, in June, I did a podcast about the cedi depreciation that before June, between January and June, but more specifically April and June, the cedi was the best performing currency in the world, and it appreciated of something about 50% against the US dollar. So I was telling you about some of the benefits of that and also some of the disadvantages of that. So now we've seen the cedi lose 13% of its value in the last month or so. So what, you may say, are some of the key issues that has enabled this sharp drop within the last 3 to 4 weeks? So some key factors behind the cedi's decline is that, there's dollar demand for import. So we're now in September, and, this time of year, a lot of imports in Ghana look at the Christmas market. Christmas market is a very, very big market within Ghana, particularly amongst the wealthy, upper middle class people that to celebrate Christmas. And so many businesses are looking ahead to their Christmas market. So people that work in retail, people that bring in stuff, that is non-retail, agriculture products, etc. People are looking ahead. And so between now and, you could say, the peak time, between now, September, and probably late November, there's going to be a high demand for dollars, yeah, because obviously these importers are going to go out of Ghana, go to places like Dubai, China, and take the dollar with them and buy the goods in dollars that they're going to bring back to Ghana to sell. And so, because of this, businesses are scrambling to ensure, as I mentioned, US dollars particularly ahead of the Christmas season. So this is a period, like I mentioned, when Ghana's economy becomes import heavy. Yeah, and this is why you've seen a spike in the demand for goods, ranging from food to machinery. Hence why, the demand for the dollars. Okay. Also, another reason for the sharp depreciation in the cedi in the last month is limited central bank intervention. So, as I mentioned in June, one of the reasons why, I'm not saying the reason, but one of the reasons why the cedi appreciated against the dollar was because the Bank of Ghana was essentially buying dollars, yeah, and pumping that into the economy, yeah. So that intervention by the Bank of Ghana enabled the cedi to gain traction against all major currencies, including the US dollar. So now, what the Bank of Ghana is doing now, they're scaled back is direct support in the forex market, and they are choosing a more cautious approach, i.e., not buying dollars to prop up the cedi. And this approach is now aligned with the IMF commitments. Yeah, so this means that commercial banks are not getting all the dollars that they need, hence creating a supply a crunch. So because Ghana is on the IMF program, yeah, Ghana has to adopt and be pragmatic with some of the conditions, yeah, that is contained within the IMF agreement. And so, the intervention that we saw in the second quarter of the year is now being scaled back by the Bank of Ghana. Yeah, and this is another reason why the cedi had depreciated against the US dollar. Now, also, seasonal pressure meets structural constraints. What do we mean by that? So even though Ghana's international reserves hit a 3-year high of 11.1 billion in June, the central bank is holding back from fully deploying this 11.1 billion. Yeah, that makes sense because rather than put that money into the economy, yeah, they're saving that money for a rainy day, which makes sense. So the central bank is holding back from deploying these reserves and putting that into the economy. So they're withdrawing that 11.1 billion of reserves that's been gained recently, yeah, it's been pulled back by the government. So or rather the central bank, yeah. So what that is doing is allowing the currency to give it like an artificial level as opposed to a superficial level that we saw, you could say, in the second quarter. So now, the Bank of Ghana's aim is to ensure that, the cedi maintains orderly fluctuations. So rather than the aggressive, defend of the cedi. So rather than have a situation whereby the cedi goes up and down. So for example, particularly 2022, when the cedi lost a whopping 50% of its value, and even in 1 month, I think the cedi lost 25% of its value. The government or the Bank of Ghana wants to avoid that, yeah, that sharp and inordinate fluctuations. So they're leaving that 11.1 billion aside and looking at how the cedi will perform without being superficially or artificially tampered with. Now, the last reason why the cedi has depreciated against the dollar is that, it's like a balance basically. It's like the gains that were created in the second quarter is now been balanced out by this fall. Now, what do I mean by that? So the cedi's strong performance early on the year, particularly in the second quarter, was a whopping 50%. Yeah. So this made imports cheaper, yeah, and more attractive. But now this had a reverse turn of hurting exporters. So importers, because the cedi was strong against the dollar, it made imports cheaper. However, on the flip side, those companies and businesses who were exporting to from Ghana to other territories, it was more expensive. Now, the current depreciation of the cedi is like a realignment, yeah, to correct the rebalance that you have between imports and exports. So even though the cedi has lost 30% of its value in the last month alone, when we look at it as a whole between January and September, right, it is still 23% year to date. Yeah, so far the cedi has, even though the last month has been a bit has declined, despite that, the cedi year to date is still up at 23%, which is very, very respectable. Yeah. So even though this third quarter that we're in now has been a bit rough, yeah, it's not a full-blown crisis. So, you know, if you are wanting to come to Ghana to do business, yeah, or if you are a diaspora who is worried about the exchange rate, yeah, you shouldn't be worried, because basically, right, the cedi is still strong compared to what it was in the beginning of the year. And inflation in Ghana now is very low compared again to what it was at the beginning of the year. That when you bring your dollars or pounds here, you will get more than what you would have done in June, July, and early August, when the cedi was, you know, very, very strong against the world currencies. So we're now going to focus on inflation, yeah? So, you know, I mentioned a point last, you know, in June, when the cedi appreciated, yeah, was that, you know, a lot of Ghanaian businesses, yeah, were not, you know, bringing down the price of goods and services, yeah, particularly food, yeah. And as I mentioned at the time, you know, there was a cost of living crisis in Ghana, and that the high cedi, yeah, the high cedi, or rather the appreciation of the cedi, should have allowed, you know, goods and services to come down in Ghana. But because of, you know, little nuances here and there, and some greeders also, you know, the price of goods and services were not coming down as fast as it should have been. However, you know, because the cedi has been fairly stable, despite this 13% depreciation in the last month or so, the cedi, or rather inflation, right, has begun to come down, yeah? And that has in turn helped, you know, the cost of living crisis that Ghanaians were experiencing, particularly in the last couple of years. By now, prices of goods and services, and particularly food, is beginning to come down. Now, looking about some research that I did earlier on, you know, Ghana's current rate of inflation for August is 11.5%, which is a 4-year low, yeah, since October 2021, when it was last in this region, yeah. So that shows that during the turn of the year, month by month, right, this is signaling a downward trend in terms of inflation, yeah, because of the strength of the cedi, particular strength of the cedi. And so, you know, this has impacted, again, when we look at, you know, food inflation. So food inflation was 15.1% in July, yeah. In August, that's gone down to 14.8%, yeah. So that shows you that the prices of some goods and services, particularly food, is beginning to come down in Ghana, and this is a welcome development, yeah. So despite that, though, there's also a flip side to this depiction of the cedi, and why that inflects that could, you know, typically feel inflation, right? So when the cedi loses value against the dollar, right, imported goods become cheaper, and because Ghana is an import-led economy in more cases than not, yeah, in terms of fuel, food, machinery, pharmaceuticals, etc., right? When the cedi weakens, right, these goods and services become more expensive in local currency, pushing up consumer prices. But like I said, inflation now is 11.4%. I'm not saying that the prices of goods and services not going up. What it means is that the rate of that increase is much slower than what it was in the beginning of the year. So in the beginning of the year, right, inflation was 25%. Now, in September, that's now 11.5%. So that's a big drop. Yeah, that's nearly half of what it was in the beginning of the year. So even though inflation is the city has appreciated or depreciated rather recently, that has enabled the prices in some areas to come down. But like I said, inflation is still there, and it's a real thing that affects ordinary citizens in Ghana. So again, uh, inflation also fuels transport and utility costs. So even just recently, the water company of Ghana and also the electricity company of Ghana have advised the PURC, which is the regulatory committee, that because of, and this is nothing to do with the city, right? But because of imbalances in the system, they need to put up utility costs by something about 200%. Yeah, that's despite inflation being low, and despite the city performance against the dollar and major currencies over the last 8 to 9 months. So again, transport prices because of fuel, the fuel imports, fuel prices hikes, and that has a ripple effect for the economy. So when petrol goes up, right, that has a domino effect in the economy, affecting transport fares, utilities, and production costs. And also, again, this hampers business as well, because obviously the city is depreciated, so imports are going to be expensive, and that makes that puts higher costs on businesses who most likely are going to pass on to consumer. Yeah, so that's sort of the downside of the city depreciation. But so we're now going to go into some of the measures, yeah, that the government can adopt to A, stop the slide, B, give the city a more realistic stability. By what I mean by that is that you can never see the city, even from now, being under 10 cities to $1. I don't think that's gonna happen. I don't think it would work for the economy as well. And so, that's going to be a level between 10 and 12 cities, right, that the government needs to work on. And also other measures that can be done to stop this dollarization of our economy in parts of it, where the local currency can be used instead, that can also make the city stronger. So we're going to give you some areas now as to what can be done, yeah, to stop the depreciation of the city. Now, the first thing, and we're going to put this into two ways. We're going to give you like immediate measures, short term, and that's 0 to 6 months, and then also long term, 6 months to the next election in 2028. So short term. So this is what the Ghana can do short term. So Ghana can lock IMF and donor funds. So finalizing external debt. I hear a report that was used by the IMF in Ghana that they are predicting that by the end of this year, Ghana's GDP debt ratio would be like 50%. Yeah. And if you recall in previous shows I mentioned about the economy, particularly under the last government, the debt GDP ratio was something about 105%. So if they are going to be able to get the debt down to 50%, that will signify a significant trajectory within the whole economy. And so, when the government gets its next chunk from the IMF and also gets support from the other Bretton Woods financial bodies like the World Bank and like the IFC, it can also help boost foreign or reserves. Yeah, that can also be stored for a rainy day, or some of it can be pumped into the economy to stabilize the city. Again, what can be done to stop depreciation? Again, this is a problem that we have in Ghana. Enforce forex market regulation. So Ghana has a very, very robust forex market. However, in a lot of Western and Asian countries, you don't get a lot of forex. The only reason you need forex, right, is when you're going on holiday. So, for example, in the UK, people only change money, right, if they're going abroad for a holiday, as well as businessmen who are going to, go to maybe US or whatever, and need the dollars to do some business transaction, whatever. But more so out of times is people going on a holiday to get forex, yeah. But in Ghana, because of the way our economy is structured, that some prices are in dollars. And I'll come to that, later on. There's a lot of forex bureaus up and down the country, particularly in the capital Accra. And so, and the forex bureaus are not really regulated, as well as the so-called black market. So you've got black market tiers who sell pounds and dollars, yeah, at higher levels than the forex bureaus. So some people, when they want foreign currency, don't go to the bank per se, because the bank's not really giving them out anyway, as I mentioned at the beginning. Also, the forex rates are not as high, but higher than the bank rates. So some Ghanaians will go to these black market, so-called black market dealers and get a higher rate. And so now, what needs to be done is that the Bank of Ghana needs to enforce strict forex market regulations. And they can do this on two accounts. So one, they can carry limits, right, for travelers and also businesses, yeah? That there's only a certain amount of dollars that you can buy. They should also have documentation for forex purchases and transfers so that, it's more transparent. Also, pricing for goods and services should be in cities only. And I'll come on to that in a minute. And then also, like I mentioned, preventing black market forex trading and laundering. Yeah. So these are some of the short-term measures that the government can do in order to, stop the cedi further sliding. Now, long-term measures now, or mean to long-term, which is like 6 months to 24 months. So what the government can do is, and this is why I made the point last week about Japan investment and Pakistan investment, right? Ghana can boost local production and add value. So strengthen initiatives like what the last government did, right? The one district, one factory, yeah, and that ties in to Mohammed's 24-hour economy, right? Whereby we can modernize, yeah, for example, agriculture to reduce import dependency and increase export earnings. So this ties in what I mentioned last week about we don't need Pakistani rice and we don't need Japan investment, because if we strengthen one district, one factory, one village, one dam, these initiatives that were good under the last government, right? If we were to take that to another level, yeah, particularly circling around agriculture or focusing around agriculture, agro-processing, etc., that will significantly reduce our import dependency. Yeah, and therefore we will not need to change cedi to dollar to import particularly agricultural products. Yeah. And also that will also increase exporting, because the more we export, particularly around agricultural products like cashew, like cocoa, like coffee, like manufacturing products, yeah, the more earning or the more foreign income Ghana will be earning into its coffers, which again can be used to either A, prop up the city, or B, used for rainy day. Again, Ghana could expand non-traditional exports. What do you mean by that? So invest in other sectors like textile, yeah? Because on the Nkrumah, Ghana had a very, very thriving textile industry. We can invest in horticulture, yeah, like things like tulips, yeah, flowers, that tropical flowers that are grown in Ghana's condition. Yeah, we could invest in data services, process cocoa, yeah, to diversify, foreign exchange inflows into the country. Again, as a medium to long-term strategy, the government of Ghana could raise domestic revenue, Yeah, improve property tax collection. So, you know, that's like in this country, in the UK, your council tax. Ghana does not have a property, a well-functioning, well-organized property tax. So again, to boost revenue, revenue generation, the government of Ghana needs to robustly improve property tax, yeah, how it's collected, and more importantly, how it's managed. Also, definitely review tax exemptions, because under the last government, right, the 8 years the NPP were in power, there were some ridiculous tax exemptions up to about the value of something about $8 to $10 billion. You can't give $8 to $10 billion of tax revenues away by having these tax exemptions. And so what the current government must do, and this is why I keep on saying, we don't need foreign direct investment, yeah? It can be in-house, or give African Americans and Africans with, other Africans from the continent and the diaspora, give them incentives, right, to invest in your country. And so review tax exemptions, particularly for African and African American business owners, yeah? And also, something that I've mentioned time and time again, tap into natural resource revenue, right, to reduce reliance on external borrowing. What do you mean by that? Ghana needs to get more revenue from oil, from gas and oil, and from the mining, particularly gold and lithium now. Let me come to oil and gas. From the information that I have at my disposal, Ghana gets about 12 to 30% oil revenue. Yeah. And that's not enough. The very minimum Ghana should be getting is about something like 25%, so a quarter. Yes, we know these companies, put billions to invest in your oil fields, but if the raw material isn't there, all the machinery in the world can't extract that raw material. So the government of Ghana needs to advise itself that we have the resource, and that these countries are just using their capital to exploit the resource. Without the resource, there's nothing there. So the government of Ghana needs to review some of these oil and gas contracts, right, and get more revenue or royalties from those resources. Again, look at gold. Gold is now at a new all-time high. I think this week or last week, now selling at $3,500 an ounce. Yeah. So we should be getting more from these mining companies. I'm not talking about illegal mining, guys. I'm talking about, the big boys, the large corporate scale mining in Ghana. Companies like Anglo Gold Ashanti, companies like Goldfields Ghana, companies like Newmont Ghana, companies like Redback Mining from Australia. Yeah, all these gold mining companies, right, who operate in Ghana, should be paying more, yeah, in terms of royalties that we get from gold. Because apparently, again, from my research, the government of Ghana gets a paltry 4 to 5%. Think about it now, 4 to 5%, and yet gold at record prices. But yet Ghana is only getting 4 to 5%. And yet, again, if you look at the research, right, Ghana is the #1 producer of gold. So of all the countries in the world, Ghana is the #1 producer of gold, beating South Africa. And yet we get 4 or 5% of royalty from that. And look at how much gold is mined in Ghana last year. Over 5 million ounces was mined in Ghana last year. And this year it is predicted that 5 to 6 million ounces of gold will mine in Ghana this year. You times 5 million ounces by 3,500 ounces. Sorry, $3,500 per ounce. You do the maths and see how much Ghana will make from gold this year. And yet, because we haven't revised the contracts, why we're getting pittance. Yeah. And then finally, look at lithium. Lithium is a new kid in the block. Lithium is now responsible for AI. Lithium is now responsible for these electric cars. So batteries in electric cars need lithium, yeah, and also other, cordless lawnmower, cordless, vacuum cleaner. All these products, right, need function on lithium-ion batteries, and that lithium-ion batteries is made with lithium. And Ghana has lithium in abundance, but yet Ghana is getting 5%, again, from the Australian company that is mining lithium in Ghana, which should be getting at least 30% of that revenue into the Ghanaian economy. And that will, make our economy more stronger. That will make revenue more stronger, hence nullifying and negating the need for external borrowing. Again, what Ghana can do also is to attract, rather than go to Japan or Pakistan, attract diaspora inflows. So incentivize, this is what I said last 2 weeks ago, incentivize diaspora investments and remittances into long-term projects. Yeah. And improving the business climate to attract more Africans into Ghana, right, to allow them to invest. That will also boost your revenue and boost the value of the city. And finally, as a long, medium strategy, right, Ghana can also reduce its fiscal deficits, i.e. by prudent public spending, better revenue collection, better tax collection, which will ease pressure on the central bank and reduce the need for foreign borrowing. So these are what the government of Ghana can do in both the short, medium, and long term. Now, finally on this, we're going to tell you why, and the big thing here, that the government also clamp down on the dollarization of the economy. Because, like I mentioned before, there's too much dollarization, right, of our domestic pricing. So when you want to, so landlords charge, particularly landlords in nice areas of Accra, charge US dollars for rent, not cedi. A lot of schools, particularly the so-called international schools, they charge US dollars. Yeah. If I want to buy a new car, I go buy US dollars. If I want to buy a new house, I buy the US dollars. Yeah. If I want to even get a room in a hotel for a few nights, that's in US dollars. Why? That puts pressure on the city because people are now, to pay your son's school fees or daughter's school fees, right? You got to buy cedis, so use your cedi to buy dollars to pay for your children's school fees. Why? In the big economies in Africa, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, Morocco, Algeria, those are the 5 top economies of Africa, right? All those countries use their local currency. So in South Africa, it's a South African rand. In Kenya, it's a Kenyan shilling, right? In Morocco, Algeria, right? It's the dinar, yeah. So they price everything in the local currency, hence making the local currency strong. Because if you look at a chart, get a chart, right, and look at the strongest currencies in Africa, right? The city is there, right? But you see the top ones is basically Algeria, Morocco, and I think Tunisia as well, yeah, because they localize everything. Yeah, they don't dollarize nothing. Everything is in local currency. So that makes the practice stronger. That makes the currency stronger, rather. So what we're going to do in Ghana is that we're going to stop all this. Because A, when you price some key things in dollars, right, it creates unnecessary demand for dollar, Forex. Yeah? And that's why I said they also mentioned the black market. Because Ghanaians will rather go to the black market and get more for the city, yeah, than go to the regulated forex dealer or the bank. Again, by having everything in dollars, right, it erodes confidence in the local currency. So if citizens see the dollar as more stable, it signifies that the city is unreliable, yeah, and that fuels speculative behavior that can damage the currency. Yeah, so as Ghanaians, we need to be more patriotic. Yeah, in Britain, you don't see people pricing things in euros. If they want to buy a car, buy in pounds. If they want to rent a property, they rent in pounds, not in euros. Because they love the king, love the queen. They want the pound to remain strong. And it's about the pounds, not in the euro, because the pound is strong. So we must also make the Ghanaian city strong, right? By being more patriotic, yeah? And using the city as opposed to using the dollar. And finally on this, the government of Ghana needs to enforce laws to stop people from using dollars, right, to charge for school fees, new car, new home, rental, rental accommodation, etc., etc., right? The Bank of Ghana needs to enforce laws and make it criminal offense that anyone who is, anyone who is artisan of goods and services should be fined for charging US dollars. You should be in prison and fined accordingly to serve as a deterrent for people who still want to price fix in dollars. So the Bank of Ghana and the government needs to enforce laws that we have already to ensure that nobody prices in US dollars. Yeah. And also public awareness and patriotism drive. This is very important. Yeah. So just recently, Mahama said he urged Ghanaians to protect the cedi. Yeah. So a national campaign could be centered around that to promote the cedi and promote pride in using the local currency and expose the hidden cost of the revelation. And so these are ways and means in which Ghana could use in order to prop up the cedi and make the cedi a very, very strong currency now, in the short, medium, and long term. So I thank you for listening to this special edition of Ghana in Focus, looking about the cedi, the economy, and why it's important that Ghana maintains a strong currency, because a strong currency signifies a strong economy signifies a strong nation. So I thank you for listening to this edition of Ghana in Focus with myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, journalist, entrepreneur. In next week's edition, we're going to shift to health. We wanted to talk about health, but we're going to shift to health next week, looking about the myth of prostate cancer. Yeah, so prostate cancer is allegedly a big killer of Black men. I'm gonna, unlock the myth busting towards that. So it's a special. You don't want to miss that. Unlocking the issue about prostate cancer. So for myself, Kwame, and from all the crew here on Ghana in Focus, so thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week for some more Africa in Focus.